All right, yes, we are still in domain number 1. We are still talking about security and risk management. We have a couple of sections left here. The next section is threat modeling. We could spend quite a bit of time talking about threat modeling, but threat modeling is really an extension of what we've already been talking about this entire time with regard to risk. You know, identifying the value at the assets in our organization. What are the vulnerabilities that we have based on those assets? What are the most relevant threats? Are there different attack vectors that might go unnoticed? And we can use different modeling techniques, different functions to identify threats within the organization. We do like to collect information from threat information sources, and it really depends on the environment that we're operating in, right? For example, in 1999, Microsoft developed Stride, spoofing identity, tampering with data, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, elevation of privilege, which is a threat modeling technique that was applied to, of course, their applications. Octave, we already talked about Octave quite a bit. Operationally critical threat asset and vulnerability evaluation method. And there are many others, right? But it's really the process where we identify threats, we compare those threats against vulnerabilities, we enumerate our assets and prioritize our assets based on their value, and then we, from a hypothetical standpoint, from an attacker's point of view, we identify essentially the threats to our organization, right? Basically, we're just identifying the potential threats, looking at structured vulnerabilities, and the purpose of this process is to give your business, you as the defender, a way of systematically analyzing what controls or defenses need to be included given the nature of your systems, the probable attacker's profile, the most likely attack vectors, and the assets that are most desired by the attacker. Right? Most people incorporate some sort of threat modeling in their daily lives, right? We consider what might go wrong if we're making a journey, or if we're purchasing a product or buying a car, or children often engage in threat modeling when they're trying to determine, if they're going to try and go across the jungle gym, or it's a very simplistic approach, look at it, but threat modeling is something that we do every single day. All right. Now, threat modeling methodologies for IT purposes obviously means that we're trying to identify different threats that exist based on information technology assets. Like I said, the Stride model. There's another one called the PASTA model. I don't have that one listed here. It's the process for attack simulation and threat analysis, a risk-centric 7-step model. There's Trike as well, Trike methodology. They all kind of focus on the same concepts. Some sort of risk management framework, based on auditing and based on requirements. To establish what's an acceptable level of risk based on the assets in your organization. There's VAST as well, the visual, agile, and simple threat methodology based on Threat Modeler. I've used that in the past, and that's actually used quite a bit in DevOps life cycles. We don't really talk about that too much in this class, but regardless of what other model it is, all information technology related threat modeling processes will start with creating some sort of visual representation of the applications, the infrastructure, the assets that exist that are being analyzed. And then we kind of break down or decompose those elements into various silos or categories. And that gives us a way to identify and enumerate all of the potential threats that might exist in the organization. We need to identify risks associated with identified threats. We need to be able to prioritize those threats. The enumeration of the mitigating controls. That's really going to depend on the methodologies for the threat modeling process that we use. And then we can either implement mitigation techniques based on an attack-centric model or an asset-centric model. The attack-centric model focuses more on the types of possible attacks, and the asset-centric model focuses more on the assets that we're trying to protect. Most of these models developed some sort of data flow diagrams. They have like a kind of a visual representation of the application using these data flow diagrams. These have been around forever. And we don't need to get into the specifics of that, but threat modeling is almost a science now, right? We need to assess the scope of the modeling process. We need to identify the threat agents, the possible attackers, understand what countermeasures might exist, identify possible exploits based on our vulnerabilities, prioritize those identified risks, and then implement our countermeasures to reduce the threat to an acceptable level. I'm not really going into these in a lot of detail because we've already seen them multiple times. We've already also talked about different types of attacks. Now, I talked about social engineering. I didn't really talk much about pretexting. And this is something that they do like to kind of mention in on the test, understanding these different kinds of conceptual attacks. Pretexting is basically a type of social engineering attack where there is some sort of pretext that gets created by the attacker to entice the victim into some sort of situation or trick them into giving you personally identifiable information or something that they would normally not give outside of the context of that pretext. A specific example is, sending an email, for example, that says your computer, your subscription to your antivirus application is expired and you need to contact us. We're setting the stage for the attack. That's really what a pretexting attack is. And there are some good examples of that. But, we know that social engineering is really just psychological manipulation. And the idea is that we're trying to get some sort of unknowing or unwilling response. In the banking industry, where bank employees can be attacked, but customers can be attacked as well. We might directly target customers or employees to work around systems that might exist that normally would protect, protect assets and so on. Trustworthiness is, I talked about this previously, is a huge component. Likability. If someone is liked, they're more generally considered to be trusted, and you can establish that relationship. The low perception of a threat. You might understand that the threat exists, but you don't really anticipate that there is any kind of crazy threat that exists that would cause irreparable harm or whatnot. You kind of know it's there, but you don't really do anything about it. Response to authority as well. We're more likely to be successful in an attack if the pretext is set where the victim thinks that the attacker is an authoritative figure. right? Like a CEO or a CXO or something like that. There was a big Hewlett-Packard scandal where information was leaked and so on. That was considered a pretext attack. Phishing attacks. Phishing attacks. There are kind of two different types of attacks that are related to each other: farming and phishing. But I want to make sure that we describe the difference here. Farming is not the same as phishing. Typically, phishing attacks, it is another type of social engineering attack where we send spoofed or fake or deceptive messages to a person that reveals maybe potentially sensitive information, clickbait or something to get them to get the user to take an action to install ransomware or divulge sensitive information. They're very sophisticated, these types of attacks, and we do have protection mechanisms in place, but there are many different types of phishing attacks. Most people will associate phishing attacks to email. Farming, PHARMING attacks are related to DNS. So if you see a reference to farming, that's going to be related to DNS. But email phishing exists where we deliver an email. Could be personalized or not personalized, where there is some sort of link inside the email that gets them to log into a site so we can capture their credentials. There is a spearfishing attack. Spearfishing involves an attack that's targeted to a specific group of individuals or a specific organization. A spear, pointy spear. Sending emails to a particular person. It's not bulk. We're not just sending out tens of thousands of emails, but we're attacking an individual, a specific individual. A whaling attack, also a similar type of spearfishing. It is a spearfishing attack, but whaling attacks typically focus on CXOs or high-level executives, senior executives, or what we call high-profile targets, and those types of attacks are generally reputational attacks or extortion attacks against executives. They have a relatively low success rates, but they have been known to be successful. Clone phishing. Clone phishing is a type of phishing attack where a legitimate or previously delivered email that contained an attachment or link had its content and recipient information taken so that we can create an almost identical email. So we think that maybe we're getting a second copy. Very effective, by the way. Voice phishing or vishing, the use of a telephone to voice conversation to gather information. Smishing, SMS phishing using SMS messages. There's all kinds. There's calendar phishing. There's page hijacking. We will do link manipulation. All kinds of things in these different types of phishing attacks. I don't know if you guys ever watched the show. Now I can't think of the name of it. Mr. Robot. It was a great show. I always think when I see baiting attack, I always think of that show, Mr. Robot. It was a, kind of a drama, if you will, about cyber attacks and hacking and whatnot. But quite honestly, a lot of the attacks that they used in that show were really factual and very effective. A baiting attack. Imagine if you took 100 USB flash drives and went to the busiest airport in the world, Atlanta International Airport, Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, and you dropped 100 USB flash drives around the terminal. how many of those flash drives do you think would be plugged into a computer? I would say a good portion of them. People are curious. Hey, a free flash drive. Ooh, maybe there's some interesting stuff on this flash drive that might be nice to see. So they're going to plug it into their computer, and then of course they get, infected. That's what a baiting attack is. In fact, in that Mr. Robot show, they needed to access a computer inside of a prison. But unfortunately, prisons are notoriously secure. Getting into the prison and getting into the inner sanctum of the prison was very difficult to do. So they just dropped a bunch of USB drives out in the parking lot where all the prison guards parked. And sure enough, a prison guard grabbed one of those USB drives and walked it into the prison and plugged it into the computer that they needed to gain access to. Tailgating, we all know what tailgating attacks are. Pretty common, actually. Maybe not in a business, but in social events and whatnot. So that is the end of that section.